all share in similar dreams. And so we are hoping that we can collectively contribute a bit to make it successful. So as mentioned earlier, I'm sharing my screen with you. Okay, so please, can you see the screen? Hello, can you see? Doreen, can you see the screen?
Yes, your screen is very visible.
That's fine. That's very well. Good. So as mentioned, as part of the series of programs we have lined up for the month, this month and next month, we are looking today at teaching grammar through contextualized activities. Let me lower. Okay, so I need to take off the image so I can see the screen clearly. Very well. So for most of us who are teachers of English as a second language, I mean, one of the challenges that we have has to do with getting our students to accept the rules of the language, that is, accept the rules of English, which is grammar. And especially when our students are coming from different multicultural environments where they are so adept in their own language. And so they're transitioning from their local languages to the English language becomes a bit of a challenge. And as humans, we all don't like following rules. Probably, we don't know, but some part of us is like that. We find it difficult adjusting to rules, how much more rules of language. And that is where, as teachers of English, we have to go an extra mile to help our students appreciate these rules, not just as things of do this, don't do that, but things that you see as part and parcel of the language process. So our discussion will focus on taking us through various strategies that can help us to contextualize the teaching of grammar using activities that these students are familiar with, these students can associate with, so they can find the lesson more interesting and not see the rules as a bit of boring. Now, this is the outline of the presentation. So we will try to understand contextualized grammar instruction. We will look at some of the key concepts of contextualized grammar. We would look at some theories, some second language acquisition theories that are in favor of contextualized grammar. And then we delve into looking at the strategies for implementing contextualized grammar. And as part of the strategies, we'll try to situate some of these strategies into the various aspects of grammar that we teach. And then, of course, we will conclude. So we ask ourselves, grammar. I mean, we all recall probably when we were in class and our teacher will come and say, we are learning now. So what is a noun? A noun is the name of a person, place, or thing. We commit these to memory. And the next time the teacher comes, we probably don't remember what a noun is. Or we walk by the streets, we see items, and we even forget that these are some of the things that we learned as nouns. That is because the rules were so abstract to us. Grammar, as we all know, is a system of rules that governs how a language functions. And so as a system of rules, it includes things like words, phrases, clauses, sentences, etc. And grammar can be divided into three key aspects. So there's a part of speech which will look at more like the building blocks of the language. So it talks about the noun, adjective, adverbs, pronoun, etc. Then there are sentences which would focus on how the words are arranged or put together into meaningful context. So we look at clauses, independent, dependent, we look at sentence type. Then the mechanics would concentrate on the usage. So the punctuations, the commas, capitalization, spelling, pronunciation, etc. Now, these things are very essential because when students are abreast with the rules of the language, it helps them to convey meaning effectively. And so when we put together sentences, we would notice that these rules that we enforce help the sentences to be very meaningful. And when it becomes meaningful, then we avoid misinterpretation and confusion because we're able to use the grammatical rules to express ourselves clearly and then precisely. Again, it allows us to communicate effectively in a language. So with a language which is English as a second language, we're able to communicate effectively because we know the rules. We are avoiding confusion. We are conveying good meaning. And that ultimately would enhance the fluency that we have in this language. So what is contextualized grammar? Now, when we speak of contextualized grammar, it is a language teaching approach. And this approach integrates grammar instruction into meaningful context. And so what contextualized grammar does is, instead of treating grammar as a standalone subject, or probably as a standalone topic, what it does is it tends to infuse these rules of the language into real life situations, everyday activities. And by doing so, we tend to enhance the students' understanding of the subjects, and then they are also able to retain the rules for future use. And in trying to integrate it, what do? We use everyday activities. So authentic text, we come to look more at some of these authentic materials. We use conversations and scenarios that the students can come up with themselves. We look like events and situations that they are familiar with to help them see the language in action. And so with these things, it helps the students to grasp the grammatical rule and see that the grammar is part of the language that they are learning, and that it works together with the other components of English language, and not seeing grammar as an abstract, standalone subject where they have to memorize rules and try to remember these rules at certain times, even when they are not coming. And so contextualized grammar, in its simplest sense, is, yes, teach grammar, but use context, use situations, use everyday experiences, use real life situations that the students are familiar with, and let the students explore these grammatical rules in these everyday situations. And so they see grammar in action instead of seeing them as rules. There are some concepts that help us to properly contextualize grammar. I'll talk about 5 of them. So one of them has to do with integrating the grammatical rules with authentic materials. Now, when we talk of authentic materials, what we are looking at has to do with things that the students are familiar with. So things like music or songs, things like texts they read, things like activities, or depending on which country you find yourself in, probably there may be certain festivals or certain passage rites that the students are familiar with. Probably they attend outdooring, they attend birthdays. These are things that the students are aware, and in this context, language are used. And so what we do with the integration with authentic materials is, instead of teaching the grammar rules, memorize it, do this, the students will, through other means, use these materials that they themselves can convey to help them understand it. Again, another thing is that contextualized grammar encourages exploration over explanation. We know that when it comes to the traditional method, it focuses more on memorization and rote learning. But then what contextualized grammar does is it encourages exploration. And so students are guided to discover these grammatical rules by engaging in activities that promote analytical and critical thinking skills. And it helps the students analyze the grammar in context. So they fish for the items they've learned, instead of you, the teacher, just explaining and expecting the students to memorize and then recite it at another time. Again, another concept is to encourage the use of thematic teaching. Thematic teaching would mean that we will tailor the lesson to suit students' interests. And so we will use scenarios that are relatable, scenarios that the students can identify. The students can even come up with these scenarios themselves. But then what the thematic teaching does is it makes grammar instruction more relatable and engaging for the students. So they tend to appreciate them more. Again, there's a connection between meaning to emotion when you use contextualized grammar. So when you teach grammar in context, it emphasizes the connection between the grammatical choices and the effect that they have on the meaning, the effect that they have on their audience response, and the effect that they have in the various texts that they are reading. And so it would involve that we would discuss the specific grammatical structures with the students, and this would influence how they feel and interpret certain things. So they're able to connect the meanings of the things they're learning with how they feel, how they react to situations. So then they are emotionally involved, and that helps also to enhance their understanding. The last but not least of these concepts has to do with incorporation of all language skills. Contextualized grammar is so beautiful that by the time you are done teaching just one set of rules, what the students would have done is to imbibe all the various language skills. So it is not just about rules. It involves speaking, it involves reading, it involves writing, it involves listening activities. So all the other language skills are incorporated in one lesson that you are teaching, and that makes it more interesting. So the key concept is, let's use authentic materials. Let's encourage exploration instead of just explaining. Let the students use, let's use thematic teaching. Let the students come up with scenarios or themes that they themselves are interested in. Let's find a way to connect meaning to emotion. Let's find a way for the students to see the relationship between what they are learning and how they feel. And then through that approach, we will help the students to see that grammar is not an isolated subject, but then it incorporates all the other aspects of language learning. So we've come to see remind ourselves of what grammar. We've seen some of the concepts. We've understood what contextualized grammar is. What are the benefits? Why would we even encourage this? In the course of the explanation, some of these benefits were indirectly mentioned, but one of them is a help to enhance retention, because the students are creating their own scenarios. The students are creating their own context, or you are guiding them to create their own context. They are able to retain the things that they learn, and then they're able to remember it because the knowledge is something that they are personally involved. And because of that, it increases their understanding. Because if the students, for instance, use a particular context to learn something, to learn an aspect of the rules, let's say part of speech, anytime the students see or come across a related context, what he or she learns comes to mind. And there is also increased engagement because the students are not just passive receivers of the information, they are active consumers. We are creating the understanding with them. So it increases engagement, and they themselves find themselves involved in what is being learned, and it helps them to understand them well. So much about those, the benefits, the context. What are language experts saying about it? So in my research, I came across the 4 theories. There were indeed a lot, but I thought these 4 were more key. So there are theories of language acquisition that supports or highlights contextualized grammar teaching. One of them is Vygotsky's sociocultural theory, Swine's output hypothesis, interactionist theories, and then the connectionism. What Vygotsky and his associates try to argue is that they suggest that learners can achieve higher level of understanding and proficiency when they are guided by more knowledgeable others, when they are able to use social context in learning. So for teachers who are familiar with these contexts, let's guide these students to learn these rules of the language using social context that they are familiar with. And with that, so their social cultural environments, they use it to apply the things they're learning, and then they get to understand it more. Swine's hypothesis also posits that when we want students to learn a language, and especially the rules, then we should contextualize the learning by highlighting the importance of interaction and practical use of the language in real life situations. So more like connecting meaning to emotion. The interactionist also argues that in fact, for them, they align the contextualized learning by advocating that learning environments where language is used in authentic interactive situations is more memorable. So if we use interactive situations, if we use authentic context, the students, the learners would always remember what is being taught. And the connectionism also explains that we should try to form an association between language elements and then the importance of how rich it is in meaningful context. So if you look at all these theories by these language experts, you realize that they try to encourage reintegrating things like stories, integrating things like education, things like social environment, cultural context into the language, into the rules, so that the students would see these rules in their natural form. They will see the real application of these rules, and that helps the students to be able to recollect, not only recollect, but be able to apply these rules in their context. So we move on to look at some of the strategies. Now, having gotten to know what the rules, what's contextualized grammar is, we've mentioned that it has to do with situating these rules in everyday life or everyday activities. Let's take the rules, but let's use, in fact, for educators or learners of education, we always thought that we should teach from the known to the unknown. So the students know these contexts, they know these environments, they know these situations. Let's use what they know to teach them what they don't know. So more or less, let them come up with their own strategies, let them come up with their own situations that they can identify with, and let's use that to explain what they don't know to them. So what strategies can be used? So we are going to discuss such strategies that can be used in trying to implement contextualized grammar, trying to use contextualized activities. I have mentioned earlier on authentic texts or authentic materials. What are some of them? So regardless of the country you are in, regardless of your locality, there are songs, there are certain videos or movies that these students are familiar with. We watch them, they also watch. They listen to the songs. We listen to these songs and music as well. There are literatures that you read, probably from a newspaper or from a favorite textbook that you are using in school. These provide examples of language use in their natural settings. Songs are made from language. Rules are applied in these languages. Movies involve dialogues, etc. These are languages. The various articles or stories that they read in their various subjects are all language-based. And these are things that they see, sometimes people they know. So if you take songs, for instance, the musician or the artist could be someone they know, their favorite artist, and they see this person using the language. And so if you are using something from someone they adore or admire to help explain what they don't know to them, you can imagine the effects it will have on them. They won't remember. So that is with authentic material, things that have been testified, proven. The students cannot doubt it because they are there. We can also use real life situations or real life scenarios. And in terms of the real life scenarios, we can use role playing or simulation. So we can set up, we can mimic a real life interaction where the students will take roles. So they will take different roles within it. And what they are doing in these roles is they are practicing grammar in context. So if we teach them something, let's say we teach them tense or we teach them adjectives, then we create a scenario, probably with them, share the rules, and help them to use these adjectives or these tenses or whatever grammatical structure that we have taught them in their various roles that they are playing. So they practice the grammar in context, not just going to read and memorize it and then come and recite it at another time. We can equally use interactive and collaborative activities. So with the interactive and the collaborative activities, we are encouraging group work. We are encouraging group work through role playing. So this time, it is not just about students taking individual roles, but then the students actually communicate. So they are working together with their colleagues, negotiating meaning, etc., by applying the rules that they are learning. The reflexive activities could take the form of probably getting the students to reflect on their own usage. So in other subjects that they are learning, they do continuous write-up. They form sentences. Probably in other aspects or topics you've taught them. So maybe you've taught them composition, they have written some essays. Let them bring back these things that they wrote themselves. And let them see, try to identify that particular grammatical structure that you are teaching them in their write-up. So if it's tense, as I mentioned, let them pick their own work and try to identify how did they form past tense, how did they form the progressive, how did they form the future. So they are reflecting on their own work and see how well they practice or how well they use it. Then they can make corrections where there is the need. We've mentioned about thematic projects or thematic scenarios. So here, what we encourage is guide the students to select themes that interest them. The students can come up with any theme. So some of them could be interested in sports, some could be interested in travel. Some of them would want to talk about farming. The females in the class would want to talk about fashion. Others would want to talk about technology. So let them come up with their own themes that interest them. Usually when we are selecting themes and we try to impose on them, it defeats the purpose. Because then the students would have to find a way of liking the themes that we have selected. But then if we guide the students to come up with their own themes, and regardless of the theme they set, everything in the world is language. In fact, in one article I read, they said language rules the world. Without language, we cannot carry most of the functions we do. And so regardless of the theme that they select, they will find language in usage. So we don't want to impose on them because probably you, the instructor, you're interested in technology. So you want to take a technological scene. No, let them come up with their own scenes. And what they do is when the students create these scenes, it will require them to use specific grammatical forms. So for instance, the students choose, let's say, a restaurant setting. And then they use how to use polite requests using modal verbs. So you're teaching them modal verbs. And then they are trying to practice how to use these modals to make requests at the restaurants. So please, would you need this? So then the students are applying these modals. So when you tell them that if you want to use can, you are using it to express ability, the students will memorize it, yes? But then when the students actually practice the use of this modal verb in context, then he or she will properly understand what you are teaching him or her instead of it makes the learning more realistic because they're able to apply what they are being taught. Then we can also use interactive technology. Fortunately, we're in a technological age. And whether we like it or not, some of the students or our learners are more tech savvy than we are. If you engage them, you'll be surprised with the things they can use technology for. Let them see how technology can be applied in language, in learning the rules. So there are platforms like Kahoots, there are platforms like quizzes, there are platforms like Quizlets. They can even come up with their own apps that I can use to create mini quizzes. So they create their own sentences, their own games, their own quizzes or exercises on the grammatical structure that we are teaching them. And when they create it themselves, they feel like they own it. And they can even use these interactive technological apps or games that they have done to challenge their mates. So how many sentences were you able to form with us? Then the student compares it with what the other colleague did. Oh, I can do more than you. So if you had 5, the student goes ahead to probably do 6. Or the questions that they have said, they have formed, they ask their own colleagues to try and answer them. So we don't want to forget about the relevance of technology when it comes to language teaching. And I was looking at the topics and I think there was one of them that has to talk about using technology to teach grammar. And I'm sure when it gets to that, you will get more insights into how we can imbibe these technological tools in the teaching of grammar. But at least we want to know that within these technological tools, we can situate the teaching of grammar. So let's try to engage the students in it. And even if they are to come up with a game app, they can write a description of that app. And that description is language. The rules will come into play. So they will be able to use that as well. So these strategies are there for us. They are things that we are familiar with. And in fact, these are not the only strategies. I am sure in our various schools and environments, we probably are exploring other ways that we help students to see the language in use. So let's use things they know. Let's use real life scenarios. Let them act roles. Let them interact and work with their colleagues by using language. Let them see how they have previously applied the language in their own, or the rules in their own writing. So they will reflect on it. Let them come up with things that interest them, with things that they can relate to. And let them see how the practical use of language in these tools. Technology we've mentioned is there. Let them see how interactive they can use the rules in these aspects. And so by far, we've come to see that it is not so abstract, it's not so difficult for us to teach grammar. I mean, gone should be the days where we go to the board and just write or project. Our lesson for today is on nouns, or probably it's on spellings. And then we list the rules of spelling, and then we expect the students to memorize these rules, and it becomes too abstract. They won't understand, or even if they should understand, they will forget. But when we situate these in context, contextualized activities, then what we are doing is we are concretizing these abstract grammatical rules. So the students don't only see, but they feel, they touch the rules. They see the rules in action. They see the rules being explored by people they know. They see the rules being explored in text that they themselves have read, etc. And that helps them to have a better understanding and appreciation of what we are teaching them. So we've come to see the strategies. Now let's see how we can apply these strategies. And so in the next few slides, what we are going to do is to create certain, look at some aspects of the grammar. So you touch on verbs, you touch on some aspects of mechanics, you touch on some aspects of sentences, you touch on some aspects of, I think punctuations. And then we will see how we can apply these contexts, these strategies. So if you take verbs, for instance, we can use music, use songs. So after we have explained what verbs are to the students, probably a verb is a doing word, an action word, or something that describes a process, depending on how explanation you will use. You can use songs. So what is the popular song in your community? Which of them can these students sing? Some of the students can even write the lyrics they know the songs more than we do. Let them highlight the key grammatical points that you discuss with them. So if, for instance, you are teaching them verbs, and verbs, you just want to let them appreciate the concept of verb as a doing word. Let them isolate all the verbs in the songs. If it is tense form, for instance, let them identify that particular tense. So if it's past tense, they write down the lyrics, or probably both of you together with them, you listen, and then you tell them at every point in time, when you see a lyric or you hear the lyrics, identify the past tense in there. So they identify all the past tense in the songs. And then when they are done, you can ask them to now rewrite the song using maybe the present tense. Or if the song was in the present tense, identify all the tenses, now rewrite the song in the past tense without making any changes to the structure of the song. So now the student is not going to apply his or her understanding of how the past tense of verb is formed. So it is no longer going to be like, oh, the past tense of jump is jumped. So, okay, it's a regular verb, I should add ed. But the students will actually see an example and do the conversion. And he realizes, or she realizes, that this is not just about something that I don't even know the relevance of. because I am seeing it used in a song that I like. I have seen this musician that I adore so much use some of these tensors in his or her song. So if I learn these rules well, then I probably can also do better or do same like the musician. So we try to help them to identify that and to make our lesson more interesting. We can also create dialogues that incorporate these grammatical points. So what we can do is we will try to probably take, let's say a video or a movie and look at the various roles that were played by people. What were the things they said? Can they identify that particular verb form that you are teaching in that line? That can also help. In our various countries, in our various groups, we have local literature, we have folk tales. In my country, Ghana, one of their favorite folk tales is the Owusu story. And so depending on which ethnic group you come from, we all have different names for Anansi, the spider. And there are so many stories around it. Children love it. So what is a favorite folk tale in your locality? What are some of the favorite literatures? We can use some of them so the students can read some of these folk tales. And like they do with the song or the music, they can equally identify the grammatical forms in there. So they know that, or even before we were born, these things were being used. So we are not the first to be using it. And we will not be the last to use it. So let me learn it well, so that if I have to create my own story, then I will probably use it, because I don't know who in future is going to analyze my story. So it helped them to see how these things are. So again, if you take the story, you can ask them, well, we are trying to identify all the future tense in the sentence. We are trying to identify all the past tense. We are trying to identify the participle tense. So these things will help the students to appreciate it more. Role playing, we've talked about role playing, that we can create simulations. So let them create maybe an interview session. We mentioned restaurant session earlier on. They can come up with a restaurant session, which will require them to apply various grammatical rules or various aspects of the verbs. And as they navigate their ways through these rules, these everyday situations, they would tend to appreciate it. What about community interviews? Our students love to take leadership roles. So sometimes they want us to engage them in conducting small interviews. Let them go and speak to their parents. Conduct interview with probably their parents about a local custom or a local history. Okay, so he goes home and then asks mommy or daddy, mommy, how does this come by? Why do we do things just the way we do? Why do we act this way as against this other culture or this other ethnic group? Why do they have something different? It is an interview. Now, they listen to it, but their focus is not just on the history or the custom, but what you are guiding the students to do is, so as mommy or daddy narrate this to you, if you want to write, you can write. If you want to record, you can record. But when you come to class, I want you to identify the use of future tense in all the things that mommy said. I want you to identify past tense or present tense in those. I want you to identify the perfect participle. I want you to identify. So the student listens or conduct those community interviews. He gets to know something about his or her custom, but it becomes more interesting because now he doesn't have to go home, take his or her book and try to memorize how do we form past tense? How do we form the regular, the irregular? But through interaction with mommy, daddy, through interaction with other people within the house, he or she sees the language in use. So we can use some of these scenarios or strategies to teach verbs. And the good thing is these scenario strategies that we've talked about, they are multifaceted. They can be used to, they are not restricted to, let me say, one aspect of grammar. They can be applied in all different contexts. So if you are teaching, for instance, part of speech, you are teaching adjectives, you are teaching nouns, you are teaching them prepositions, etc. Can you use a grammar word hunt? We can create some a word hunt for the students. And what we will do is we ask these students to identify these things. So for instance, within their classroom, we can ask them, look around and point to any noun you see. So then they'll look, they see the cupboard. They see a picture of probably a dog. They see this, they see that. So they are hunting for these items. If it is adjectives, okay, so you see the dog, the picture of the dog on the wall. If you want to let us see, appreciate the dog more, what adjective would you use to describe the dog? And the student, oh, this dog, I think it's a big dog. No, madam, this dog is the eyes are too, it looks, you said this, no, it's a tall, it's so they come up with their own adjective to describe what is there. So then they would actually see that when you tell them we use adjectives to modify to describe nouns, will not be an abstract thing, but they have actually looked at an image and they are using these adjectives to describe them. So if in future they have to exemplify these adjectives, it doesn't become anything difficult. You can also give them a checklist and then ask them, so throughout the day, anytime you list all the various parts of speech, probably ask them to list them on a paper or on a card. Anytime you move around and you see a noun, take it. So you take one. Anytime you see or you see someone does an action which is a verb, take. If you identify the use of a pronoun in any sentence, mark it. So they will check off these things. And what it does is it reinforces the understanding through exploration. So they explore and then they understand them instead of you just explaining to them what it means. Very well. So can use grammar bingo. In fact, in most countries, grammar bingo has been tried and tested to teach different grammatical terms. So we can create bingo cards with different grammatical names. And as you call the definition, the student marks the corresponding item. So if you mention, it names a person, it names an animal, then the student will take. So he knows that, oh, this, you are describing this. Or it describes how an action takes place. The student knows the particular grammatical structure you are talking of, then he or she take. So that can equally help them to properly appreciate the various parts of speech we are teaching them. So we are no longer going to list the various parts of speech and struggle to find ways of, so you are teaching exclamation, you are teaching interjection, and you are struggling to find out how to use it. Meanwhile, this interjection you are teaching them has been used in one of the movies or one of this, let's say, soap opera they watch on TV. So it means that we as educators should also find time to like the things these students like, so that when we are trying to create context, we can create familiar context. If you're going to use your own context that the students are not familiar with, probably your favorite music or your favorite song, they can identify with it. But if you come up with your own, then they will. What about if you are teaching things like issues relating to mechanics like punctuations, capitalizations, spellings, etc.? Can we provide the students with sentences? Yes. We can create sentences, and within these sentences, we would deliberately use wrong punctuations. So within the sentence, we intentionally create errors by spelling, either misspelling a word, wrongly punctuating it. We give it to the students and we ask them to correct them. So the students must identify all the mistakes, either as in they work alone or they work in groups. And I always like to let students work in groups, then they can tap on the strength of their colleagues. Usually when they work individually, it becomes a bit boring for them if they are struggling. But when they work in groups, then they tend to encourage each other. And so you can let them work in groups or in pairs, and then ask them to identify or spot out all the mistakes in it. in the sentences. And then they should explain why these are mistakes and suggest ways of correcting them. So this even promotes critical thinking about the grammatical usage. The student understands why a full stop was used here or why this word was wrongly spelled, because he explained to you why it has been wrongly spelled. So he can actually use it when the need arises. Still on mechanics, we can use a very popular tested one, punctuation change challenge. It's one of the strategies that I use a lot whenever I'm teaching students punctuation. I will tell them, listen, at this level, you're not interested in just the science, because at the basic level, you learn the science. Listen, I want you to show me the science in action. So the various punctuation marks. You create sentences, and then you can decide to either, so the same set of sentence or the same set of phrase, punctuate it differently and ask the students to tell you the understanding they get in. So like the two examples you have on the screen, let's eat grandma. Let's eat grandma. Then you ask the students, how do you understand these sentences? What is the meaning you identify in sentence one? Let's eat grandma, with a comma after it. And then the second one, which has omitted a comma. And the students will tell you, okay, in the second one, it looks like we probably will land ourselves in jail because we are going to eat grandma. Grandma is going to be on the dining table. But in the first one, you are instructing, let's eat. So you're calling the person grandma. So now they see that, well, if they don't properly punctuate the sentences they write, probably will land them into trouble. They will miscommunicate because their ideas will not be clearly sent out. Or we look at the second example, stop, men at work. As against stop, men at work. It's the same group of words. Stop, men at work, just 4 words. But the differences in meaning is coming from the punctuation. So when we use the punctuation change challenge, the students will get to know that the moment they change punctuation mark in, they move it or they shift it from one place to another, the meaning of the construction will change. And that can equally help them to know how meaning is being conveyed using punctuations. We can also decide to use sentence scrapbook. We can provide the students with mixed up sentences, and these mixed up sentences would include various punctuation marks. Again, they work in pairs to rearrange. So here they are not just spotting out the mistakes, but they are rearranging the sentences. And as they rearrange the sentences, they would have to also check the punctuation as well. Because if you are moving a sentence from, let's say, the first paragraph to, or the first line to the third line, the new position might affect the kind of punctuation you place there. And so when they are rearranging them, it can equally help them to reinforce their understanding, not only on punctuation rules, but to even reinforce the understanding on sentence structure as well. And that can go a long way to help them. Again, we come to songs and lyrics. We spoke about some of the popular songs they like. Within these songs, there are punctuations. Even though it is oral, the musician will probably not sing, place full stop. But if the students understand that a pause is a comma, a comma can be used to indicate a pause, a full stop can be used to indicate a stop. Then as the students analyze the songs, they try to place punctuation marks at the various points, and then see how these punctuation affect the rhythm and the meaning of the lyrics. So at a point in the music or in the song where the musician pauses, if the student thinks that the student in groups, they can figure out what punctuation mark they should place there, then they indicate it. It gets to another point, they identify if it was something that has to do with emotions. They know the punctuation mark that is associated with emotion. So they probably will place an exclamatory mark there. If they get to where the musician is probably asking, interrogating, they place the appropriate punctuation. Then when they are done, they tend to look at how they have punctuated it the lyrics in the song and check if it is altering the meaning of the song. If it is, then they'll have to probably look at the way they punctuated and then revisit to do it correctly. So we can equally use popular songs that they know. And as I indicated earlier on, our students, when it comes to things like songs, movies, don't they know a lot. Because on their phones, they are always listening to the song, they are watching one movie, social media, mime, etc., etc. Let them use these things as part of the context to situate the various rules that they are learning. We can equally use creative writing exercises. We can ask the students to write short stories or write short narratives about the experiences that they know. So they can write about the day everything went wrong. They can write about their favorite pets. And as they write, they will punctuate, they will spell. They will use capitalization. So we check the appropriate use of these things. So when it comes to part of speech, when it comes to issues about mechanics, when it comes to issues about tenses, etc., we have ways that we can use to contextualize it. We wouldn't want to think that these are too abstract, these are isolated things. No. Some of the few examples we have considered help us to see that the context have always been around us. Probably we have been using some of them, but we have not really paid attention to them. And so we want to now pay attention to them. As we plan our lesson, we want to incorporate this in the lesson plan. And so it makes it part and parcel of our delivery, and we can use that to help students understand things better. What of sentences? We would have explained what a sentence is to our students, so they know that there should be a group of words, it should have a subject, it should have a verb, it should have a complete meaning, etc. What then do? We can create a mixture of correct and incorrect sentences, and then ask the students to look at what we have done. They should analyze it and identify all the sentences that have been grammatically are well formed, based on the understanding of what the sentences. And then look at the ones that look more like fragments and explain why they think some of the sentences have been well formed and why they will label others as fragments. If they're able to do so, it helps. So they can even come up with their own sentences and we can use them. One of the methods that we use a lot has to do with filling the blanks if you are teaching subject-verb agreements. So we form a sentence, or we give the students a sentence, and then we leave a blank and ask them to choose the appropriate verb form to fill in. Usually the examples that we use are our own coinages, our own creation. But if you are using contextualized grammar, we are using contextualized activities, then what it means is that this time we are not only going to create examples out of the blue, but we can look at the things the students are familiar with and use examples from them. So we can select the examples from their own favorite song, their own textbook, their own festival or an event that they have witnessed before. Let's select examples from these things, and that can help them. So it doesn't look like Madame or Sir has sat home and then he has experimented his own examples and then he comes to give them to us. We leave the classroom or the lecture room, and the other contexts or scenarios we find, we can't apply them. No. This time, these are their own contexts, their own scenes, and then they are applying them. News and articles, current events, they're all around us. In every country, on a daily basis, there are a lot of newspapers that are churned out. In Ghana, we have a lot. Daily Graphic is there, Ghana Web. I mean, on a morning, typically a Monday morning, we are flooded with so many newspapers. The internet is there. There are so many news articles there. They visit CNN, they visit Al Jazeera, they visit BBC. They listen to everyday events. Let them use articles from these local newspapers or these international newspapers to discuss the current events. And as they do so, what you are interested in is helping them to see how their favorite newscaster formed sentence using subject verb to bring out meaning. You are helping them to identify why a sentence in that newspaper or in that podcast is not a complete sentence. In fact, they would even tell you because they understand what sentences. So within that context, they can identify whether the various news articles or current events have properly used the sentences or they've been used wrongly. What I used to do is I ask my students to look at so whenever they are listening to news, I tell them, listen, take a shot of the information, that the captions that are written. I always ask them, so take a shot of it. If you identify any of them that you think has been wrongly written, in fact, that should even be of more interest to you. So when you come to class and you are teaching a particular sentence structure, a particular grammatical form, what I do is, okay, so we take these shot out from the various TV stations, and then they just display them. Okay, I think this particular TV station, they are captioning here, madam, they omitted this, it should have been this, and they wrote it as that. So then it is not, it's not the lecturer telling the student that these people made errors or probably this was well done. The students identify it themselves. And it even makes them more interesting because then they go to sit by television or they sit by their radios and they are not only interested in the news that are being said, of course, they get to hear of the current events. But this time, they have a wider focus because they are now analyzing certain things that they are using. They are analyzing maybe their tenses. They analyzes their sentence structure. They are analyzing their pronunciation. They are analyzing so many things. So then they get to know that, hey, if I don't learn these things well, Charlie, next time I will be the point of discussion. So they will pay more attention to it. And it helps a lot. Again, instead of sometimes coming up with sentences, we are teaching them, let's say, complex sentence. We are teaching them compound sentences. And you're always coming up with our own. We can ask the students to list as many simple sentences as possible. And then ask them to combine them using different conjunctions. So a student will write, oh, I like football. I don't like hockey. You ask the student to combine the two sentences. Either I like football, but I don't like, so then they are actually learning, practicing how to form compound complex sentences depending on the clauses in there. They can combine the ones that are dependent to the ones that are independent. So you would have to save yourself the task of always explaining that this is a dependent clause. No, they know when they see dependent clause in sentences, they can identify because they have analyzed structures which contains either dependent or independent clauses. So that can help in sentence level activities as well. Picture prompts. So we can portray an image and then ask them to use short sentences or short paragraphs to describe these pictures. I think that's one thing that most teachers use a lot when they are teaching sentences. If you want to engage our students to write, usually we'll display an image and then we ask them either orally or in the written form to describe the image. And in this writing, you remember we mentioned that one of the key concepts of contextualized teaching is the incorporation of all language skills. And so as they write these pictures, as they describe these pictures, as they use sentences to bring out meanings in these pictures, the sentences is going to take care of all the issues about verbs. It's going to take care of all the issues about punctuations and spelling. It's going to take care of all the issues about sentences. And so within just one activity, you have managed to incorporate different aspects of grammar. They are listening, they are writing, they are reading. It enhances the understanding. So we can make abstract things more concrete for the students to appreciate it better. Okay, so still on group activities, we can use, still on sentences, we can use group activities where the students, we provide students with a note card with the sentence fragments from a song, from a novel, or probably from a conversation, and then ask them to rewrite. So they look at the note card. What you have provided is a fragment. It's a sentence with missing parts. Then they rewrite it and probably explain why they have done these corrections to what you gave them. And that equally helped them to structurally understand how sentences are formed. And as they also practice it orally, then they get to know how these sentences are being used to perform different functions. We can create writing assignments. So if we want to use things like what we mentioned earlier on, where we said we can creative writing activities, we can equally come up with, let them engage in other short stories, dialogues in these write-ups. So they can probably narrate something that's happening within the week and rewrite it. So as they narrate, they put it in writing, and that can help them also incorporate different grammatical structures that we have taught them. If you're teaching phrases and clauses, we can equally use the same strategies that we use for sentences to teach them. We can now decide to use sentence and scramble. Earlier on, we talked about sentence scramble. But this time, we can give them a mix-up sentences that include various phrases and clauses. And then we can ask them to work in pairs, work in groups, to rearrange these into coherent sentences. And that would equally help them to appreciate what we are teaching them. Sentence crafting. They can create their own sentences using a particular tense form. They can do a phrase or a clause hunt. You give them a whole paragraph. Or you ask them to come to school with a textbook or with a newspaper. And then, so either in pairs or in groups, you ask them to identify or label all the different phrases or the clauses they see in those in a particular paragraph. So they can tell this is a noun phrase, this is an adjectival phrase, this is a prepositional phrase, and they see it in action. So the essence of all these contextualized activities is to help students to see language use in their natural setting, in their natural environment, in their everyday communication, in their real life situations, in things that are around them. So now when they are learning grammar, it is not like, oh, this a new language and we have to memorize all the rules. No, they are not memorizing the rules. No, they are identifying based on what they have been taught. They are seeing that these rules are what makes the language work. If I don't pay attention to these rules, my sentences will not be well formed. My pronunciations will not be well done. Indeed, they see that, oh, this is my favorite musician, this is my favorite newcaster, has a full grasp on the language. And I see that the person properly used these grammatical structures. So if in future I want to be like him or her, then I probably would also have to take my grammar serious. So they tend to have that feel with what we are teaching them. We can also use interactive grammar games where students can match phrases with their definitions. So just as we did for the words, this time they can match phrases with the various definitions, and that can equally help them to get a fuller grasp of what they are being taught. What of storytelling clauses? So we can have the students write short stories or paragraphs, and then they now build on this paragraph. They expand it. And as they're expanding it, they are incorporating varieties of phrases and clauses. So we can even just give them a topic sentence and ask them to develop that topic sentence. As they develop the topic sentence, what they are going to do is, if you have taught them, let's say, noun phrases, we are going to ask them to incorporate as many noun phrases as possible. And for each sentence, they probably should underline the noun phrase they used. So it is not you giving them sentences and asking them, underline all the noun phrases in here. No. But they create their own sentences and they identify the phrases or the clauses in. And as I mentioned, it's more interesting, more engaging when they work in pairs, when they work in groups. So it becomes fun-based and they would love to enjoy them. Writing composition, so we can equally use short stories or books. You can assign students to read the story and identify instances of particular grammatical structure. They can do storytelling. They can use, you mentioned creative writing activities. So even teaching things like writing and composition activities, we can equally situate them in, you can situate them in context that they are familiar with. So the key to doing all these things is not just to come up with the scenarios or situations or concepts that students are familiar with. The key is we want to contextualize. We want students to see the grammatical rules not as an abstract standalone thing, but we want to infuse it into meaningful examples, into dialogues, into write-ups that they are very familiar with. And as we try to engage the students in this context, they are more likely to understand. And it goes beyond just understanding, because they are also more likely to apply these concepts in their own writing, in their own speaking. And that is because they have seen these grammatical structures in use. They have seen these grammatical structures in practice. They have seen that it is not just rules that they have to memorize, but they are rules that they have to use. And they have seen these rules being used. So it becomes easier for them to just follow along with the discussion. And they would always look forward to another grammatical structure or grammatical item you teach them, because it doesn't become boring for them. It's not about they having to memorize root learners and then have to come and reproduce it, and they're struggling on how to do it, etc. So we want to try some of these approaches and see how realistic, how they can help. So let's look at some. I create this, I say, a sample contextualized grammar lesson. So let's take that you go to class on a Monday, you are teaching tense. And I like to talk about tense a lot because I've noticed that most of the challenges we have in our sentence construction is tense-based. So we start a lesson. How do we go about it? We probably will create a warm-up where we would probably as a way of the warm-up, we will do a recap of what we learned the previous day or what we learned the previous week. We can even ask them to start singing, ask them to recite a poem. And in this poem, we want to identify the grammatical structure we learned the previous day. So if the previous day we learned adjectives, in that song, they should identify adjectives. So it's just a way of warming up. And then we introduce the lesson. The particular tense form, we explain what it is. After explaining it, let's guide the student to create a scene. I chose the market scene. You can come up with your own scene. You can ask the student, probably some of them will want to talk about a birthday scene, because over the weekend they attended a birthday. They attended an outdooring. You can even ask them, what activity did you partake in over the weekend? Okay, let's use that as the scenario. So within this scene or this theme, we are going to identify the use of how the various actors use, let's say, the present tense or the past tense. So if you are taking a market scenario, for instance, as I have here on the screen, the journey to the market, there was conversation. The students can enact it. So they play roles. Someone is a mother, someone is a brother, someone is a sister, someone is a market woman, someone is different roles. And then they enact how they communicate, they converse on their way to the market. So the journey to the market involves conversation. It involves dialogues. And these dialogues are being given by the students, but they are indicating how the past tense is used. So probably I want your dialogue to be in the past. So converse with your friend in the past tense as you go to the market. They explore how to use it. If they make mistake, you discuss with them how they can rectify or how they can correct it. Okay, they've read the market. Now they are trading. So the items they want to purchase, how would they engage the market woman, or how would they engage the grocery, the shop owner, or the mall? How would they engage the person? They use past tense. or they use a particular tense form that you are teaching. Again, they see it in practice. Or they can just have some of the classmates play different roles within the mall or within the market setting. There are several activities that goes on. So they can just, some of them would also be creating auxiliary or supplementary market dialogues, still using the tense form. And so you get to know that by the time your lesson is done, it is not the student going back home and picking his or her textbook and memorizing how the present tense is formed, how the past tense is formed. No. The student notices that, okay, even when I am buying something, or even when I want to go back to replace something that I bought at the market or at the shop, I have to use past tense. The students have seen how him or herself, together with other colleagues, actually practicalize these tense forms. And so they get a better understanding of it. And so what we are saying in all this discussion is, yes, we have done grammar as a standalone subject in several scenarios and occasions. Let's move it a step higher. Let's try to let our students be more interested in it. Let's try to contextualize it. That we've come to see that grammar is essential for effective communication, and teaching it in context enhances not just the understanding or the comprehension, but also the application. We've come to see that if we integrate grammar into meaningful activities, real-life scenarios, the students will see the relevance and the full function of what we are teaching them, instead of just seeing them as rules that they have to memorize. We've come to see that contextualized grammar can foster deeper learning, engage students, and help them apply these structures in authentic situations. The various strategies that we have discussed, the authentic materials, the exploration over explanation, the real life scenarios, the linking of meaning to emotions, these various strategies, when we implement them, it can empower the students to take active role in what they are teaching them. And aside they taking active role, for us as educationists, it makes our work easier, because then we are able to encourage the students to create more engaging, more meaningful concepts themselves that can help their understanding and application of the grammar. These are sample references for the presentation. Thank you for your time and attention.
Wow. Thank you so much, Dr. Victoria. What a packed presentation. Everything is very necessary. And one phrase I think that will stay with me throughout the presentation is exploration over explanation. Exploration, where the student does self-discovery, over spoon feeding, where we do only explanation. Thank you so much. We had a few questions during the session. One of them on Facebook, Mr. Jire, forgive me if I get your name wrong. He asks, what assessment strategies do you recommend relevant to these contextualized activities? I know you mentioned some of them, but if you could just highlight one or two assessment strategies to help our listeners.
All right, so thank you for the question. So one thing with the contextualized grammar is we are not so much interested in the marks the students will get. We want the students to see language in use. We want the students to see the rules in application. And so as a form of assessments, if we say we give the student, let's say, a group of sentences, or if we ask the student to come up with a song and we ask them to identify a particular tense form in it, we know the marks we are awarding for each of them, each tense that is rightly identified. And so we can decide that, okay, as part of your assessment, select a favorite song. And we know the song. So the song that they select, sometimes what I ask my students to do is print out the original and then attach the corrected ones. So when you come, I'm able to tell whether you are able to identify the structures. So, and based on that, you can use it to assess them. So you look at the original form, and then you look at the reworked one, and you can then know how to grade or how to award them. So we can still use these contextualized scenarios to assess them without we necessarily have to come up with our own cooked up questions all the time.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Owusu-Ansah also asked for a little bit more explanation on the SWAIN's output in the Zoom chat room. I don't know if you could help with that. So I think when you were going through the concept underpinning contextualized grammar teaching.
So the SWAIN's output hypothesis is a text that was done by second language acquisition learners. And they possess that when we produce language, which is the production is the output, it is essential for language learning. But then what they encourage is that we should support these outputs in contextualized settings by highlighting the importance of interactions in practical use of the language. So whatever it is that we want to produce, let's use real life context. And they have actually tried it in certain settings and see that children or learners who learn the rules in contextualized settings or using contextualized activities are able to perform well than those who learn it in isolative cases. And that is what their hypothesis was, that yes, use real life scenarios, use practical ways. Students get it better, they understand more than you trying to treat them as isolated, standalone topics. That makes it difficult for them to appreciate what you're teaching them.
Okay, thank you. We have another question in the Zoom chat room from Mr. Samuel Kone. He asks, when it comes to the selection of songs, is it every song that a teacher of English can select for their learners? He asks this because some of the songs that our students may be familiar with are set out in our local dialect, and some may be a combination of English and our native language. So maybe he wants to know, should we just do with purely English songs, or we can do songs that mix up the languages?
Okay, so what is our focus? Our focus is on helping them improve their language in English, so improve the application of the rules in English. And we are teaching them the rules of English, not the rules of the various local languages. For that, the students probably would have more insight into it. And so if we are selecting a song, we can select a foreign song. So if we take, instead of selecting a song in the local language, if there is a common song in the English language, common to both the learner and the teacher, we can select that. Alternatively, if you want to use a local song, then it means that you have to transcribe it into the English language, and that probably will make it more difficult, if not challenging. So if we have, I mean, in almost every country, I wouldn't say, well, probably I can hedge a bit and say that in almost every country, English, there are a lot of English songs that our youth are familiar with. So if it is English language that we are teaching them, let's choose English songs. Or if the song has a mixture of both English and the local language, our focus is on the aspect, the lyrics that are in English. That is the focus that we are using. If you decide to use the local ones, then we have to do a bit of transcription. And sometimes when we are transcribing and we don't get the translation word, it also affects the meaning. So we can alter the original meaning based on how we transcribe. So we want to be a bit cautious when it comes to transcribing songs.
Okay, thank you. And another question from Mr. Emmanuel Butchie. He asks, how does contextualized grammar lesson apply to teaching grammar to lower primary learners?
Okay, so different levels have different focus. I think in our various school curriculums, if we look at the expectations or the topics for every aspect, it's every level, it varies. As they move up the ladder, it becomes more advanced, more intense for them. At the local level, they probably will just be interested in let's say definitions or identifying. So if, let's say, let's take that probably at the primary one, all the students want to know is identifying nouns. So within the class, and I think for some of us even go to class with real objects. Other times we go with pictures. We can use these pictures or these real objects to just teach them the level that they know. So if it is just the definition or the identification that we want at that level, let's tailor our examples, our context to that. If we move to another level and we have to up the skill, then we choose another context that is befitting. So at every context, if we are teaching the students, usually we tell them A for apple, B for ball. These are nouns. So if you are teaching them nouns, then that A for apple, if you pick the apple and we've told them that a noun names a thing. So what thing is this? If the student is able to identify it as a noun, then it means the student has an understanding of what the concept is. So even at the lower level, we can still tailor our examples to suit the expectations that are required of us.
Thank you. Thank you. I think that was the last question in our Zoom chat room. Let me check on Facebook. Okay, so we have another question on Zoom from Mr. Gilbert Sando. His question is, how does he use these contextualized activities at the senior high school level, where students have difficulty reading, even with two-letter words? Even with two-letter words, how does he use these contextualized activities with them?
Students at the senior high level having difficulty with two-letter words. I'm just wondering how they manage to get to that level. Because, I mean, in some countries, I don't know what pertains in all other countries, but I think I can speak for Ghana, where before you get to the junior high level, you have to do a lot of writing. You get to senior high, before you get to the senior high, you have to do a lot of BC, etc. That involves a lot of writing. Well, if unfortunately we happen to have students who are still lacking at that level, then our expectation would have to be way down. And so we would it still boils down to what examples you are selecting. We would not want to use complex structures when the students are not even familiar, can't identify the complex structures. And so we would have to create simplified structures that the students can follow through. And you know, sometimes what I have observed over the years is that even for students who find it difficult reading complex English structures, when you ask them to come up with their own examples, they know what's they know these examples. Sometimes indirectly, they know what we are teaching them, but they are not aware that they do. So if these students cannot do complex reading, then probably you have to re-syllabify the various songs or the various texts that you want to use, the various examples into meaningful, smaller chunks for them to understand. And that would also mean we have to encourage our students to read extensively so that they can improve on their language acquisition. Maybe you can still use group reading, so as a contextualized approach to help students read complex. So they read in groups. Each person read, this group read, another person reads, and they tend to improve on their reading so that they'll move from just the two-letter words at the senior high level to complex structures at that level.
Thank you. Mr. Philip Allah wants to know, how do we apply these strategies, taking into cognizance the limited time allotted to our various lessons?
Okay, so if you look at the sample lesson that I showed us, usually in most schools, I think a lesson usually is 40 minutes or so. Yeah, so if it's 40 minutes, let's say our warmer is like 1 minute. And it means, I mentioned earlier on that it means that you as the educator or the instructor would have to do some of these selections or these do the timing. Usually when we are planning our lessons, we allot time to every section. So you know that I'm going to use let's say a minute or two for my introduction. I'm going to use a minute or 5 minutes for explanation of the concept. And then I will use the other minutes for the exploration. I mean, we don't want to force all of them on the students at a go. That will backfire. So just as we would plan our lessons and break the lessons into components based on the student's understanding or the student level, based on the time allotted to us, you can equally do so. So you choose just one context and then you use it to just identify what you are teaching. If you are not able to complete it, the lesson will continue on another day. So you don't want to just force to finish everything within a day. I mean, it will not even help the students. Some of them, too, you can give it to them as take-home assignments. Like I mentioned, ask them to go home and interview mommy on why certain things are not done or certain things are done, and then write it down. But when you write, what I want you to do is probably identify this grammatical structure. So what you couldn't finish in class, the student takes it home, look at it, brings it back to school, and then you assess and analyze whether it has been done. So even within the time, you can plan a lesson with the limited time you have. Of course, no teacher goes to class and have the entire day to teach a topic. And so you have to segment what you are going to do based on the allotted time.
Thank you. Mr. Patrick Arthur wants to know, regarding the news and current affairs aspect that you mentioned, how will this work effectively in a village setting, particularly at the basic school level? How would you implement using the news and current affairs in this circumstance?
Okay. So there are several strategies that were mentioned. Depending on your circumstances, some of them may be applicable, others may not. Even in the villages, they listen to news. They watch movies. Sometimes I was telling a friend that sometimes you sit in Accra and you think the whole of Ghana is Accra. But when we go to the villages, we are surprised with the things they know. And so they sit by their radio. They have small radios. If they don't have if they are not abreast with the current events, then choose another context that they are familiar with. So the fact that we have mentioned, and that is why the discussion focused on several aspects of it, which of them is applicable? Probably you may want to, I mean, in our part of the country now, we're in a political season, and so you probably would want to be a bit apolitical. So you decide not to use current events, so you don't align to A or B. Yes, but there are other contexts which are neutral. So if we are in the village settings and our students are not so conversant or familiar with current events, what were we going to use the current event to teach? Were we going to use it to teach sentences? Were we going to use it to teach tense? We can find that in another context. We can find that in a folktale that the students are familiar with. You can find that in a funeral activity that the public witnessed when they narrate what went on at the funeral. We can get these structures in because these structures, these grammatical structures, they are not restricted to one context. In fact, one of the things that was mentioned is that we can use just one context to teach different aspects of grammar. So if we are restricted on current events, let's look for another one that is applicable, that the students can identify with and use that.
Okay, thank you. And to add to what you said, these days, a lot of the villages, even if they don't have fully set up radio stations, they have what we call the public address system, where they make announcements, phone announcements, programs coming up, and things happening in the community. So I think that could also help. A lot of villages now have that set up. So that is an option. Yes. We don't have any new questions in the chat room for now. It has been, yes, we have listened to the presentation, but a lot, as I said, a lot of things for us to digest after the session and see how best to apply them in our classrooms at the lower level, primary level, or even the high school level, and even at the pre-tertiary level. So I'm sure a lot of us got that. We had a lot of people commenting about how impactful the presentation is, how they appreciate the format of the presentation, and wishing to have access to the presentation material afterwards. We will work on that later. So for now, we'll say thank you, Dr. Victoria, for the presentation. We'll go to the next part of the session. So I will share my screen now. First off, we would like to acknowledge and show appreciation to Batanga State University. Without their support, without their impact, these sessions would not have taken place. We now would like to present this to Batanga State University as a certificate of partnership. Batanga State University is located in Pablo Bourbon campus. This is their College of Teacher Education. As the official partner institution of IELTA Ghana for this project, Global Educator Mentorship Project. It is awarded on this day, 21st September 2024 via Zoom, and it is signed by Mr. Ebenezer Akins, the founder and director of IELTA Ghana, and myself, Ms. Doreen Della Agbado, the country ambassador for IELTA Ghana.
Thank you very much for this partnership and looking forward for many activities for the IELTA Ghana. So again, thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Alice. Now, we go next to our presenter for today, Dr. Mrs. Victoria Owusu-Ansah. We would like to show appreciation for her efforts today by presenting her with the certificate of recognition for sharing her expertise as a resource person on the topic Teaching Grammar Through Contextualized Activities, the first session of the 4-part lecture series organized by IELTA Ghana in collaboration with College of Teacher Education, Batanga State University, Pablo Bourbon campus in the Philippines. Awarded on this day, 21st September 2024 via Zoom, signed by founder and director, IELTA Ghana, Mr. Ebenezer Akins, and myself, Ms. Doreen Della Agbado, country ambassador for IELTA Ghana. Dr. Victoria, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you too. I'm grateful for the time, the recognition, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Next off, we will go to appreciating our partners from Batanga State University. They worked hand in hand with us to organize this session. We would start with Dr. Alice Kabinga in recognition of her outstanding efforts as organizer of the first session of the 4-part lecture series on the topic Teaching Grammar Through Contextualized Activities, hosted by IELTA Ghana, presented today, 21st September 2024, signed by Mr. Ebenezer Akins and myself, Ms. Doreen Della Agbado. Thank you.
Again, thank you so much. And also, it is very great. We are really grateful for allowing my students to join and be part of this activity. Actually, they are in the Zoom right now. So thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you too. Next, we would like to present this certificate to Ms. Regina Priscille DeLute in recognition of her outstanding efforts as organizer of the first session of this 4-part lecture series on Teaching Grammar Through Contextualized Activities, hosted by IELTA Ghana. Without your efforts, these sessions would not have taken place. Thank you, Ms. Regina.
Okay, Ms. Delute is currently attending a special activity for this evening. So in behalf of Ms. Delute, I am accepting this recognition. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. And to round it all off, we would like to say thank you to all IELTA Ghana members who are able to join us on Zoom, on Facebook, IELTA International members from different branches, all other English language professionals who are able to join us today. We would like to say thank you very much. We have more sessions coming up. Follow up on our Facebook pages for regular updates on when the sessions will take place and the time. But we would also like to invite interested English language professionals who would like to present for IELTA Ghana. You can contact us via our email, and we would love to hear from you if you have any topics of interest, or we could also suggest topics for you to present for us. So our doors are open. IELTA Ghana is a platform that is open to English language teachers from all over the world. Thank you.